The tape measure hit the floor before she understood why her hand had opened. Vivian Lancaster is 31, black, beautiful, slender build, deep brown skin lit from inside, head master tailor at Duval Atelier on Madison Avenue. She dresses billionaires. She dresses senators. Tonight she dresses a ghost. The client file sits on her kitchen counter. One name printed in serif black, Shin Woo-jin, the silent blade, head of the Shin family, Korean mafia boss of Manhattan, Koreatown, a dragon tattoo she has not seen in 6 years, a husband nobody knows she ever had. 10 o'clock the next morning, VIP Suite 7. Woo-jin stands in front of the tri-fold mirror, half-basted tuxedo across his shoulders. White chalk marks down the lapel. The dragon coils up the left side of his neck, half visible above the open collar. Vivian steps in with pins between her teeth. He does not turn around. From now on, he says, no one else measures me, only her. 6 weeks, 6 fittings, her hands on his shoulders, his breath above her hair. A Russian bride named Anastasia storming the showroom in white sable. A black orchid on the atelier door with no signature. Wedding of the year, 6 days out. And then she finds something inside the lining of that tuxedo jacket that nobody was supposed to find. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. She did not knock. She lowered her hand back to her side, and she pressed her palm flat against the door of VIP Suite 7. The corridor of Duval Atelier was empty at 10:07 in the morning. The Persian runner beneath her heels absorbed her step. The chandeliers were dimmed to a discreet amber. Somewhere below, Celeste was uncrating a shipment of ivory duchess silk, and the muffled thud of a wooden crate came up through the walls like the heartbeat of a house that did not yet know a war was starting inside it. Vivian breathed in. She counted the inhale to 4, the way Margox had taught her at 22. She counted the hold to 4. She counted the exhale to 6. The tape measure across her shoulders had been steamed at 7 that morning. The velvet pincushion at her left wrist held 47 silk pins in a perfect grid. Her deep burgundy midi dress fell without a crease. Every detail of her body was a fortress she had built with her own hands over 6 years and 4 months. And now the fortress was going to stand 3 feet from the man who had once slept with his face against her spine. She turned the handle. The suite opened without sound. Vivian stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a click no louder than a coin dropped onto velvet. VIP Suite 7 was a chapel of glass and gray silk. The walls were upholstered in dove-gray moire. The floor was aged French oak laid in herringbone. In the center, on a low walnut platform, stood the trifold mirror, 3 panels of hand-silvered Venetian glass, 7 feet tall, angled inward. A rolling brass rail carried the muslin toil of the wedding tuxedo, half-basted, pinned in white chalk, the sleeves pinned open like the wings of a moth. Shin Woo-jin stood on the platform with his back to her. Vivian did not stop walking. She had trained herself for this too. A master tailor never freezes at the door. A master tailor enters the room already measuring. She let her eyes take in the geometry of the fitting the way she had taken in 10,000 fittings before, and she named each element to herself in the calm interior voice of the professional she had become. The client stands on the platform. The client is facing the central mirror. The client is not yet dressed in the tuxedo shell. He is dressed in the fitting shirt provided by the atelier. The client is 1 meter 88 in height. The client's shoulders are broad. The client's waist is narrow. The client's posture is upright. The client has a black tattoo of a coiled dragon rising up the left side of his neck. The top button of the white Egyptian cotton shirt was undone. The collar was folded back slightly on the left side, as if he had loosened it himself moments before she entered, and the ink beneath ran from just above his clavicle up along the tendon of his neck and disappeared into the line of his jaw. Vivian saw the dragon before she saw the man, because the dragon was the thing she had never touched, the thing he had refused to let her see for the last 4 months they were married, the thing he had covered with the collar of every shirt he owned, and with the palm of his own hand when he slept on his side, and the moonlight from the window of the apartment on 29th Street tried to reach his neck. She stopped 6 paces from the platform. Her voice came out even. She had practiced the greeting in the mirror of her own bedroom at 6 that morning, and she had chosen the words for their neutrality, and she had timed the cadence to a metronome set at 60 beats per minute. "Good morning, Mr. Shin. I am Vivian Lancaster, headmaster tailor of Duval Atelier. I will be conducting your fitting today. Madame Duval sends her compliments and her apologies for not attending in person." The man on the platform did not turn. He did not lift his head. He did not shift his weight. He did not answer her greeting with the polite murmur that every client, from Emirati princes to Wall Street heirs, offered without thinking. He stood in the exact center of the walnut platform with his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on his own reflection in the central panel of the trifold mirror. And in that reflection, Vivian could see the lower half of his face. The sculpted jaw, the straight nose, the lips pressed into a line so still it looked drawn with a ruler. And she could see that his eyes were not looking at himself. His eyes were looking past his own reflection at the reflection of the door behind him, and the reflection of the door behind him held the reflection of her. He had watched her enter. He had watched her cross the 6 paces of French oak. He had watched her stop. He had watched every second of her arrival through the silvered glass in front of him, and he had chosen, deliberately, not to move. Vivian's hand did not tremble. She unwound the tape measure from her shoulders in a single practiced motion, and she let it hang from her right hand, and she took one more step forward. "If you will permit me," she said, "I will begin with the shoulder measurements. Madame Duval's notes indicate the toil has been basted from the previous consultation, but our house policy requires a full remeasurement at the first fitting with the head tailor." He spoke then. His voice was lower than she remembered. 6 years had darkened it, and something inside those 6 years had polished the edges of it into something that no longer needed to raise itself to be heard. He spoke in English, and the English was flawless, and the accent under it was the same private cadence she had once known better than her own pulse. "From now on," he said, "no one else measures me." He paused. The pause lasted 3 heartbeats. Vivian counted them. Only her. He did not turn as he said it. He did not look at her through the mirror any longer. His eyes had dropped to his own reflection now, to the undone top button, to the edge of the dragon at his collarbone, and he spoke the sentence into the glass as if he were reading it off the surface of the silver itself. The room did not move. Vivian felt her tape measure in her right hand. She felt the 47 pins in the velvet cushion strapped to her left wrist. She felt the pressure of her Swiss dress watch against the bone of that same wrist. She felt the weight of her hair falling past her waist in the dead-straight silk press she had spent 2 hours setting the night before, and she felt each of these things with the strange, sharpened clarity of a woman who has just been told, without preamble, that the past she buried is going to be excavated by the same man who buried it with her. She did not answer him. She walked around the platform in a slow, deliberate arc, keeping her eyes on the seams of the fitting shirt and not on his face, because she needed the 10 seconds of her own footsteps on the herringbone oak to reset the metronome in her chest. She stopped at his left side. She lifted the tape measure. She held it between the thumb and index finger of her right hand, and she extended her left hand toward the point of his shoulder, and she said, in the voice she used with senators, "Please raise your left arm to shoulder height. Palm down, elbow soft." He raised his left arm. The motion was exact. He had been fitted 1,000 times in his life, and his body knew the choreography without instruction, and the sleeve of the white Egyptian cotton shirt fell along the line of his tricep in a clean vertical drop, and Vivian slid the tape measure from the bony point of his shoulder down the outside of his arm to the wrist bone in a single smooth pass. 26¼ inches. She spoke the number aloud for the recording device on the sideboard, because the atelier's policy was that every measurement was voice-logged, and her voice came out level, and she moved on. Shoulder to shoulder, across the back. She stepped behind him. This was the moment she had prepared for least. She had rehearsed the front approach in her mirror at 6 that morning, and she had rehearsed the side approach walking down her hallway with a broomstick balanced on her collarbone. But she had not rehearsed the back, because standing behind him was the position her body remembered from the mornings on 29th Street, when she used to press her forehead between his shoulder blades to feel him breathe before the coffee finished brewing. She lifted the tape. She anchored the metal tab to the point of his right shoulder with the pad of her index finger, and she drew the length of the tape across the width of his back at the level of the shoulder seam, and she pinched the tape at the point of his left shoulder with her thumb, and she read the number off the black and red graduation. 20 inches and 1/8. She spoke it aloud. Her voice did not shake. She was inches from the dragon. The ink rose from beneath the folded collar of the shirt in a coil of black lines, so fine they looked drawn by a needle held in a surgeon's hand. She could see, now that she was standing behind him, that the dragon's tail wrapped around toward the back of his neck and disappeared into the hairline at the base of his skull. And she could see the small circular scar, the size of a pencil eraser, just below the tattoo. And she remembered, in a rush she did not allow to reach her face, the night he had come home to the apartment with that scar bleeding through a folded handkerchief and told her he had cut himself on a broken glass in the office kitchen. She lowered the tape. She stepped to his right side. She measured the length from the base of the neck to the wrist bone down the outside of his right arm. 26 1/4, matching the left. She measured the length from the 7th cervical vertebra to the tailbone. She measured the circumference of the chest at the widest point, threading the tape under his raised arms and around his back and reading the number where the two ends met at the center of his sternum. 42 inches. She measured the natural waist at the level of the navel. 32 inches. She measured the seat at the widest point. 39 1/2. Each number she called out. Each number the small brass recorder on the sideboard captured with a soft green light. Each number she wrote, in her precise, sloping script, into the leather-bound client book Margox had placed on the console table beside a silver pot of black coffee that neither of them touched. He did not speak again. He raised his arms when she needed them raised. He lowered them when she needed them lowered. He turned a quarter of the way to the left, then a quarter of the way to the right, when she instructed him to, and each motion was executed with the precision of a man who had learned, at some point in his life, to be measured by strangers without allowing any part of himself to move that was not being measured. His eyes stayed on the mirror. His breathing stayed slow and even. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides. Vivian moved. She moved because if she stopped moving she would think, and if she thought she would remember, and if she remembered she would break. And she had not come into VIP Suite 7 at 10:07 in the morning to break in front of Shin Woo-jin. She had come to take the measurements of a client whose file was on the desk of the headmaster tailor of Duval Atelier, and the measurements were what she was going to take, and the measurements were what she was going to write, and the measurements were the wall she was going to build one number at a time between the tape in her hand and the memory in her chest. She knelt. The kneeling was necessary. The inseam measurement required a master tailor to lower herself to the platform, to place the metal tab of the tape at the crotch seam of the trousers, and to draw the tape down the inside of the leg to the ankle bone. And this was the measurement no assistant was permitted to take, and no client was permitted to refuse. Vivian knelt on her right knee. Her deep burgundy midi dress pooled around her ankle in a clean fall of Italian wool. The trifold mirror caught her reflection from 3 angles, and she saw, in the left panel, the top of her own head, the impossible length of her silk-pressed hair spilling forward across her shoulder, the curve of her cheekbone lit from above by the amber chandelier. She did not look up at him. She placed the tape. The metal tab touched the inseam of his black virgin wool trousers at the crotch seam, and her knuckle grazed, for 1/100th of a second, the fabric at the very top of his inner thigh, and she felt through her knuckle the heat of the leg beneath the wool. And she felt, in the sudden stillness of the man above her, the fractional catch in his breathing that no client had ever produced during this measurement in 6 years and 4 months of her taking it. She did not stop. She drew the tape down the inside seam of the trouser. She reached the ankle bone. She read the number, 34 inches and 1/4. She spoke it aloud. She lifted the tape. She stood. Her knee cracked once softly as she rose. She stepped away from the platform. She walked to the console table, opened the leather-bound book to the page marked Shin W, wrote the last 3 numbers into their columns, capped her fountain pen, closed the book, and only then permitted herself to turn back toward the platform. He had turned. He had turned while her back was to him, silently, with the same trained precision he had used to stand still, and he faced her now across the 6 paces of French oak, and the dragon on his neck was fully visible where the collar had folded back further from the motion of his turning, and his eyes, dark almond, cold, analytical, unreadable to every human being on earth except the one currently standing on the far side of the room, were fixed on her face. Vivian met the eyes. She met them for 1 second. She met them for 2. She met them for 3. And on the 3rd second she understood, with the terrible clean clarity of a diagnosis, that Shin Woo-jin had not walked into Duval Atelier at 10:07 in the morning of a random Tuesday in October, because his fiancée had chosen the atelier off a list. He had walked in because the file on his desk in Koreatown had contained a photograph of the headmaster tailor of the atelier, and the photograph had contained her face, and the face in the photograph had been the reason for every choice that had led him to this platform, in front of this mirror, in this suite, on this Tuesday morning. He had come for her. The wedding to Anastasia Volkov was the excuse. The tuxedo was the excuse. The $40,000 deposit wired into Margox's Geneva account was the excuse. The excuse was elaborate, and the excuse was expensive, and the excuse had one purpose, and the purpose was standing 3 paces from her now with the top button of his shirt undone, and a dragon rising from beneath his collar and a sentence hanging in the air between them that she had not yet acknowledged. From now on, no one else measures me. Only her. Vivian broke the eye contact first. She looked down at the leather-bound book in her hands. She tucked it under her left arm. She lifted her chin, not far, only enough to reclaim the professional angle Margox had drilled into her at 22, and she spoke into the neutral space above his shoulder. The measurements are complete for the shell. I will now proceed to the fitting of the half-basted jacket. Please remain on the platform. I will bring the toil from the rail. She walked to the brass rail. She lifted the muslin toil from its padded hanger. The half-basted jacket was heavier than it looked, weighted by the pinned canvas front and the loose basting thread that held the shoulder line in provisional shape, and she carried it across the room with both arms and lifted it toward him without meeting his eyes. "Left arm first," she said. He raised his left arm. She threaded the sleeve of the toil up his arm to the shoulder. She smoothed the canvas front across his chest. She stepped around behind him and threaded the right sleeve. She settled the jacket onto his shoulders. She reached up on her toes because he was taller than she remembered, and she adjusted the collar, and her fingertips grazed the base of his neck where the dragon rose from beneath the shirt. He did not move. She stepped back. She stepped back 3 paces, and she tilted her head, and she read the fall of the toil across his body with the trained eye of the headmaster tailor she was, and the toil fell wrong on the left shoulder. It fell wrong because the previous consultation, conducted by Margox, had used the client's declared shoulder measurement, and the client's declared shoulder measurement, Vivian saw now, was 3/8 of an inch smaller than the shoulder Vivian had just measured with her own tape. He had lied to Margox. He had lied by 3/8 of an inch on the left shoulder, and he had lied, Vivian understood with the same clean diagnostic clarity, because if the toil fit correctly on the first fitting, the second fitting would not be necessary. And if the second fitting was not necessary, he would have no reason to stand on this platform in this suite in front of this mirror across from her again. He had bought the second fitting. He had bought the third. He had bought the fourth. He had bought every fitting between now and the wedding 6 weeks away. And he had bought them with 3/8 of an inch of a lie he had told an old French woman on a Wednesday afternoon in September. And Vivian did not blink and did not sigh and did not permit her face to register any of this. She lifted her right hand. She took a silk pin from the velvet cushion strapped to her left wrist. She stepped forward. She placed the pin, with the trained economy of a woman who had done this 10,000 times, into the shoulder seam of the toil, and she folded the excess canvas under her thumb, and she spoke evenly to the collar of the fitting shirt. "The shoulder will need a correction. 3/8 of an inch on the left. I will make a note for the second fitting." He spoke. When? The word was one syllable. It was not a question in shape. It was a question in intent, and Vivian felt the intent the way she had felt the heat of his thigh through her knuckle, and she made her voice the color of the moire ray on the walls. "Wednesday, 10 o'clock. Suite 7. With you, with me." The dragon lifted a fraction as he inhaled. Vivian saw it lift. She placed a second pin in the collar seam. She stepped back. She looked at the fall of the toil in the trifold mirror, and she said to the reflection, because the reflection was easier than the face, "That will be all for today, Mr. Shin. Madame Duval will be waiting for you in the salon downstairs to conclude the paperwork. My assistant Celeste will help you out of the toil. Thank you for your patience." She turned. She walked to the console table. She placed the leather-bound book beside the silver coffee pot. She tucked her tape measure back across her shoulders in the stole position. She smoothed her deep burgundy midi dress at the waist. She walked the 6 paces to the door of VIP Suite 7, and she placed her hand on the polished brass handle, and she did not look back. He spoke to her back. "Vivian." She did not turn. The name was the first personal word he had spoken to her, and he had chosen it with the same precision he had chosen everything else in the suite, and he had waited until she was at the door, until the fitting was ended, until the professional wall she had built out of 47 pins and 1 leather book was as high as she could raise it, and only then had he said her first name across the 6 paces of French oak. Vivian's hand tightened on the door handle. She spoke to the polished brass. "For the remainder of this contract, Mr. Shin, you will address me as Miss Lancaster." She opened the door. As she stepped through, she closed the door behind her with the same click no louder than a coin dropped onto velvet, and she stood in the empty corridor of Duval Atelier at 10:47 in the morning. And she walked the length of the Persian runner to the head tailor's private office at the end of the hall. And she opened the door of that office, and she closed the door of that office, and she locked the door of that office, and she crossed to the tall arched window that looked out over the winter sycamores of Madison Avenue, and she pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window. And she stood there without moving, without breathing, for the length of 1 full minute, until the fog of her own held breath finally condensed on the pane in front of her mouth in a small pail oval the size of a coin. Then she inhaled, she exhaled, she turned from the window, she walked to her desk. She sat down in the leather chair. She opened the leather-bound client book to the page marked Shin, W, and she looked at the columns of numbers in her own sloping script, and she looked at the empty column at the far right of the page marked Notes, and she picked up her fountain pen, and she uncapped it, and she wrote in the same precise hand 3 words. "He came back." She capped the pen. She closed the book. She placed the book in the top drawer of the desk. She locked the drawer with the small brass key she wore on a chain around her neck under her burgundy dress, and she tucked the key back under the collar. And she sat very still in the leather chair for a long moment while the winter light from the arched window moved slowly across the herringbone floor at her feet. Downstairs, in the salon, she could hear the faint sound of Margox's voice, warm and professional, walking Shin Woo-jin through the final signatures on the contract. She heard the soft closing of the front door of the atelier at 11:02. She heard the muted purr of a black car pulling away from the curb on Madison Avenue. She heard Celeste's quick footsteps on the staircase, coming up to report that the client had left and the suite had been cleared and the toil had been returned to the rail. Vivian rose from the chair. She smoothed her dress. She unlocked the office door. She stepped into the hall to meet Celeste with the composed face of the headmaster tailor she was, and she nodded at Celeste's report, and she gave her instructions for the afternoon shipment of Duchess silk. And she watched the young woman walk back down the stairs with her cream turtleneck and her canvas apron and her low bun bound in a silk scarf. And only when Celeste was out of sight did Vivian allow her eyes to drop, for 1 second, to the tape measure across her own shoulders, where a single black hair, long and coarse and unmistakably his, had caught in the woven fabric of the tape from the moment she had knelt at the platform. And she lifted the hair between her thumb and forefinger, and she carried it back into the office. And she opened the top drawer of the desk, and she laid the hair between 2 blank sheets of tissue paper, and she closed the drawer, and she locked it again. She sat down. She looked at the winter sycamores through the arched window. She looked at the pale coin of condensation still fading on the glass where her forehead had pressed. She looked at the small brass key on the chain against her collarbone, and she felt the shape of it warm against her skin. And she understood, in the clean, cold way she understood all things, that the wall she had built for 6 years and 4 months had held for exactly 47 minutes on a Tuesday morning in October, and that on Wednesday at 10 o'clock in Suite 7, she was going to have to build it again, 3/8 of an inch at a time, with a man who had traveled 6 years and 4 months across the surface of the earth to stand on a walnut platform and lie to Margox Duval about the width of his own left shoulder. She picked up her fountain pen. She opened her personal appointment book. She turned to the page for Wednesday. She wrote, in the same precise sloping script that had recorded every measurement of his body, a single line under the 10 o'clock entry. Shin, W second fitting. Left shoulder, do not kneel. Wednesday came the way winter mornings come in Manhattan, blue and iron hard, the light on the Duval atelier windows so cold it looked polished. Vivian arrived at 7:40. She hung the deep burgundy wool crepe midi dress on its hook, tightened the thin black belt at her waist, and settled the tape measure across her shoulders like a stole she never took off. She checked her reflection once. The silk press fell dead straight past her waist, center-parted, glossy as still water. She looked professional. She looked untouched. She looked like a woman who had written "Do not kneel" in her own book and meant it. At 9:50, Kang Duyun arrived first. He nodded from the doorway of Suite 7, his shaved head reflecting the sconce light, the small tiger tattoo behind his right ear catching for 1 second before he turned into the corridor. The earpiece coiled from his collar, black leather gloves. He said nothing to her. He never did. He only cleared rooms. At 10:06, she heard the elevator. At 10:07, Shin Woo-jin walked into Suite 7. He was dressed for the fitting the way he had been dressed the first day and every day since. Black virgin wool trousers, white Egyptian cotton shirt buttoned to the second button from the top, polished Italian Oxfords. Over his shoulders, the half-basted tuxedo jacket, still pinned white chalk marks along the shoulder seem like a language written on him. The platinum watch on his left wrist caught the light. His hair was combed back in the same disciplined side part, exposing his forehead, exposing the jawline she had already memorized to the millimeter. Miss Lancaster. Mr. Shin. He stepped up onto the low-fitting platform in front of the trifold mirror without being asked. She approached him from the left, because her book said left shoulder, and stopped 1 arm's length away. She did not kneel. She lifted the sleeve of the basted jacket instead, pinched the chalked seam at the deltoid, and adjusted the pin. Her fingers did not touch his skin. The white shirt cotton was warm through the fabric anyway. "You've had the shoulder adjusted twice already," he said. He was looking straight ahead into the mirror, at himself, or at her behind him, she could not tell. His voice was low, even without inflection. "It fits. It fits your shoulder standing still," she said. "You do not stand still all evening at a wedding. How would you know what I do at a wedding?" She did not answer. She placed a pin. The tape measure at her shoulders slid forward with the motion, and she caught it without looking. For 6 weeks that was how it went. Monday, chest 10:07, 38 minutes. Wednesday, shoulders 10:07, 42 minutes. Friday, trouser hem 10:07, 29 minutes. He arrived at the same time on every fitting day, and Kang Duyun cleared the corridor at the same time, and Margox Duval passed the closed door at the same time. Silver Bob brushing her jaw, tortoiseshell glasses low on her nose, the red silk ribbon on her right wrist a small, quiet flag. She did not knock. She never knocked. She only passed. Vivian learned the terrain of him the way a cartographer learns a coastline. The shoulder was 1.9 centimeters wider on the right than on the left, from years of a habit she did not ask about. The chest expanded 7 centimeters between rest and full breath, an athlete's lungs. The waist was narrow, disciplined, the kind of narrow that did not come from vanity, but from long refusal. The left forearm carried a straight, thin scar 3 centimeters long, faded, old. The right knee bent 1 degree less than the left. She wrote all of it in her book. She wrote none of it in her mouth. The dragon on the left side of his neck she saw once, twice, then a dozen times, each time by accident, when he lifted his chin to check the collar. When Du-Yun reached in with a garment bag and Wu Jin turned. When the shirt collar folded down for the Mandarin measurement. The tattoo climbed from beneath the cotton in a coiled black line, 1 clawed foot suggested, the body of the beast disappearing into the shirt like a warning she was not meant to finish reading. She did not finish reading it. She measured his neck instead. 15 3/4 inches. She wrote it down. In the second week he began speaking, at first only names. Kang, Miss Lancaster, Margox, then small things. The wool is heavier than the swatch. The lining catches at the shoulder blade. This mirror is dishonest on the right side. She answered every one of them with 2 sentences at most. Never 3. 3 would have been a conversation. In the third week, he asked her a question. Where did you learn to pin a sleeve without touching the skin underneath? She did not lift her head. I learned it because clients do not always want to be touched. And when they do, they ask. He was quiet after that. She placed a pin at the elbow break. She stepped back and looked at the line in the mirror. It was clean. Turn a quarter to the left, please, Mr. Shin. He turned exactly a quarter to the left. Not more. He obeyed her hand the way a horse obeys a bit it has been trained to trust. She hated how easy the metaphor came to her. She wrote it out of her mind. She placed the next pin. Celeste Morrow came into the workroom at the end of the third week with an expression Vivian had learned to read in 3 years of training her. Something between the caramel calm of her usual face and the small, tight line at the corner of her mouth that meant she had found something she did not know whether she was allowed to have found. She wore the cream turtleneck, the high-waisted black trousers, the canvas apron with brass pins in the chest pocket. Her tight coils were pulled into their low bun under the silk scarf. Boss, not the workroom, Celeste. Boss, please. Vivian put down the pincushion. She followed her protégé into the fabric storage, the deep-shelved room where the Italian wool crepes lay rolled in ivory tissue and the silk stood on end like sleeping columns. Celeste closed the door. I was doing the invoice reconciliations. Yes. For the wedding? Yes. Celeste held up her tablet. She did not scroll, she had already scrolled. The screen was on the invoice she wanted Vivian to see. A florist in Queens, a greenhouse in New Jersey, a shipping manifest from a nursery in the Hudson Valley. All 3 canceled. All 3 cancellations signed on the client side by the same Korean initials. All 3 dated within the last 5 weeks. All 3 flowers meant for the ceremony at the Waldorf Astoria in 3 weeks' time. He canceled the peonies, Celeste said. Her voice did not rise. It was the seamstress voice, the low, even one Vivian had taught her to use in front of clients. He canceled the orchids. He canceled the calla lilies, all 3. Then he canceled the replacement florist. Then he canceled the replacement's replacement. Vivian looked at the screen. She did not touch it. There is no ceremony flower order on the atelier's calendar anymore, Celeste said. There has not been one for 11 days. Then the bride's people will have ordered their own. The bride's people did. Celeste swiped once. Another invoice, another manifest, and 2 days after they did, someone from a shell company at a Koreatown address bought out the entire wholesale inventory of white peonies on the East Coast for the week of the wedding. The bride's florist has been told there are no peonies available in North America. They are switching to silk. Silk, Vivian said in the same voice, silk peonies, for a Volkov wedding. The room was very quiet. The tissue paper rolls did not move. The silk columns did not move. Vivian looked at Celeste's face and Celeste looked back at her, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, because to say it in the fabric storage of Duval Atelier at 4 in the afternoon would have been to say something that could not be unsaid. "Someone is sabotaging the wedding," Celeste said finally. "Someone, boss. Do not, Celeste. Boss, someone is sabotaging his own wedding to keep coming back here." Vivian closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the storage room was the same, the ivory tissue still, the tape measure still across her shoulders, the small gold stud earrings still cool against her ears. She had not moved. Nothing had moved. But something in her chest had folded, the way a bolt of silk folds when you lift it from the roll. One long, clean line, and it would not unfold again the same way. "Delete the reconciliation from your tablet," she said. "Boss, delete it. Print one copy on the Atelier's letterhead. Put it in the archive drawer under Duval, private. Do not tell Margox. Do not tell me you told me. Go home at your usual hour." "Boss, are you going to speak to him?" Vivian did not answer. She opened the door of the fabric storage and walked back through the workroom and past the mannequin wearing the half-basted tuxedo jacket, and she did not look at the jacket, and she did not look at the pinned white chalk marks on the shoulder that she had placed that morning, and she went into her office and she closed the door. She sat at her desk. She opened her leather-bound book to the page for the 4th week. She turned to Monday. Chest, 10:07. She looked at the entry. She did not add anything. She closed the book. Then she opened it again. Under Monday's 10:07, she wrote a single word, peonies. She closed the book. On Monday morning at 10:07, he walked into Suite 7. She was standing at the mirror with the tape measure and her pincushion and her book. She did not greet him. She waited until he had stepped up on the platform. She waited until Kang Do-yoon had closed the door. She waited until the corridor was clear. "There are no peonies on the East Coast," she said. His eyes met hers in the mirror. It was the first time in 6 weeks she had let her eyes find his in the glass. His face did not change. His face never changed. But something behind the dark almond of his gaze went very, very still, the way a room goes still when a hand touches a candle wick without pinching it. "I know," he said. "They were the bride's peonies." "Yes, you canceled them." "Yes, the orchids." "Yes, the calla lilies." "Yes." She held the pincushion in her left hand. She was aware of the way her hand held it. She was aware of the way her breath moved in her chest. She was aware of her own reflection in the mirror behind him, deep brown skin luminous under the sconces, the burgundy midi close against her ribs, the tape measure a black line across her collarbones, the long silk press hair falling past her waist, and she looked, to her own eye, like a woman who had already made a decision and was only now being told what it was. "Why?" He turned. He did not turn a quarter. He turned all the way so that his body faced hers and not the mirror. On the platform, he was 2 heads taller than her. The half-basted tuxedo jacket slid down one shoulder with the motion and hung there, one white chalk mark exposed at the shoulder seemed like a wound she had drawn. "Miss Lancaster." "Why, Mr. Shin? You have not asked me why for 6 weeks. I am asking now." He was quiet a very long moment. The dragon at the left of his neck showed for 1 second where the collar had shifted with the turn. She did not look at it. She looked at his mouth because she had already trained herself not to look at his eyes. "Because the fitting is the only place," he said, "where no one is permitted in the room but you and me." She did not answer. Do-yoon clears the corridor. Margox does not knock. The bride's people are not admitted to Duval Atelier's private suites by contract. My uncle's men are not permitted above the ground floor. My father's ledger keepers are not permitted through the elevator. There is 1 hour on Monday, 1 hour on Wednesday, 1 hour on Friday, in which no one on this earth can hear what is said in this room. You are paying 6 figures for a suit. I am paying 6 figures for the hour. She placed the pincushion on the small marble side table. She did so slowly. She did not want the pinheads to rattle. You will marry Anastasia Volkov in 3 weeks. That is what has been announced. You are sabotaging the flowers. I am delaying the ceremony. For what? For time. Time for what, Mr. Shin? He looked at her. He did not answer with words. He looked at her the way a man looks at a coastline he already has a map of, folded in a drawer in a room in a city he no longer lives in, and she felt the folded map turn over inside her chest, and she did not permit her face to move. "Step off the platform," she said. "Miss Lancaster." "Step off the platform, Mr. Shin. We are finished for today." He stepped off. He did it the way he did everything, without argument, without haste. He unbuttoned the half-basted jacket at the single working button, and Duyun was at the door before Vivian had lifted her hand to summon him, and the jacket was lifted from Woo Jin's shoulders and folded over Duyun's arm, and the door was open, and he was gone. She stood alone in Suite 7 for 4 minutes. She did not sit down, she did not close her book. She let her breath find its slow shape again. Then she picked up the pincushion and she walked back to the workroom, and she said to Celeste quietly over the seamstress's shoulder, "The archive drawer. Duval private, add today's date." Celeste did not look up from her stitching. "Yes, boss." The next fitting was Wednesday. He arrived at 10:07. Kang Duyun cleared the corridor. Margox passed the door without knocking. He stepped up onto the platform. She approached him from the left because her book said left shoulder, and she lifted the sleeve of the basted jacket and pinched the chalked seam at the deltoid and adjusted the pin. She did not look at him in the mirror. She did not speak. He did not speak either. For the entire 42 minutes he did not speak. She measured. She pinned. She wrote in her book. He stood. He turned when her hand asked him to turn. He obeyed the pull of the fabric on his shoulders like a man being reset, like a compass being turned by a magnet he had already surrendered to. At the end of the fitting she said, "Friday. Hem." He said, "Yes, Miss Lancaster." He stepped off the platform and Duyun was at the door and he was gone. She sat down in the chair by the mirror after the door closed. She had not sat down in Suite 7 for 6 weeks. She sat down now. She put her palms flat on her thighs. She looked at her hands. Deep brown, clean, short, unpainted nails, no rings, the slim Swiss dress watch on the left wrist ticking so faintly she could not hear it. She thought about the peonies. She thought about the orchids. She thought about a man paying 6 figures for an hour of a room no one else could enter. She thought about the ledger book in her home study, the one she had not opened for 6 years, the one whose last entry was a witness signature she had not written and a Korean surname she had told herself she did not remember, and she made herself not think about it, and the shape of the thing she was not thinking about pressed against the inside of her ribs like a hand. Friday came. He arrived at 10:07. She knelt. She had told herself in her book she would not kneel. "Do not kneel," she had written in her own precise sloping script. But a trouser hem cannot be pinned from a standing position, and she was the master tailor of Duval Atelier, and she did not stop being that because a man had bought out the peonies of the East Coast. She knelt on the small padded cushion the atelier used for hem fittings. She placed the pin. She marked the chalk. She stood without touching him. She stepped back. She looked at the line in the mirror. 1 centimeter longer on the left, she said. "Yes, Miss Lancaster." "Turn." He turned. She knelt again. She placed the pin. She stood. She stepped back. She looked at the line in the mirror. Behind them, in the trifold, she saw her own face for 1 second the way a stranger sees a face in a window at night. And the woman in the glass looked steady. And the woman in the glass looked calm. And the woman in the glass was not the woman inside the burgundy dress at all. "We are finished for today," she said. He stepped off the platform. Duyun was at the door. He was gone. That night Celeste came into her office at 9 before leaving. The atelier was empty except for the 2 of them and Margox, who was in her own office with the tortoiseshell glasses low on her nose and a glass of pale wine and a stack of contracts she did not intend to sign until Monday. "Boss." "Celeste." 2 more invoices. The Waldorf ballroom florals, the chapel arch garlands, cancelled and rebought through the same Koreatown shell. Vivian nodded once. She did not look up from her book. "Boss." "Yes." "He is not going to marry her." Vivian closed the book. She placed her palm flat on the leather cover, the way she had placed her palms on her thighs in Suite 7 3 days ago. She looked at her protégé, the warm caramel skin under the sconce light, the small silver hoops. the canvas apron with the brass pins in the chest pocket. Celeste was 26 years old, and she was standing in a doorway telling her employer a thing her employer had known for 6 weeks in the shape of the fittings, and had refused to know in the shape of the words. "Go home, Celeste. Boss, go home. Wear the navy tomorrow. The client at 11 does not like cream." Celeste stood a moment longer. Her small silver hoops caught the sconce light when she tilted her head. She did not press further. She had been trained not to press. But her mouth held the tight line at the corner Vivian had learned to read 3 years ago, the line that meant a thing had been seen and would not be unseen, and Vivian saw it now and did not answer it. Celeste nodded once. She turned. Her canvas apron brushed the doorframe as she left. The brass pins in the chest pocket clicked softly against each other, a small clean sound like a tape measure being retracted at the end of a long day. Then she was gone down the corridor, and the elevator hummed once, and the atelier settled into the particular silence a workroom has after the last seamstress has left, the silence of pinned fabric waiting on mannequins for a hand that will return in the morning. Vivian sat alone at her desk. She opened her book to the page for the 6th week. She turned to the Monday entry. Chest, 10:07. She looked at the single word she had written under it 2 weeks earlier. Peonies. She uncapped her pen. Under peonies, she wrote a second word. Delay. Under delay, she wrote a third. For what? She closed the book. She did not answer the question. She was not ready to answer the question. The wedding was in 17 days. Anastasia Volkov had not yet come to Duval Atelier in person. The black orchid had not yet arrived at the atelier door. The showroom had not yet been stormed. The words "you should be flattered we let you touch him" had not yet been spoken in public. The unsigned note had not yet been slid across her desk in a plain white envelope. She did not know any of that. She only knew, sitting at her desk at 9:40 on a Friday night in the 6th week of the wedding of the year, with the tape measure still across her shoulders because she had not yet taken it off, that a man was paying 6 figures an hour to stand in a room where no one else was permitted to hear him breathe, and that she was the tailor who measured that breath, and that somewhere on the East Coast there were no peonies left, and that her own hand, the one holding the pen, was steady. And that was the thing that frightened her most. She turned the page. She turned to Monday of the 7th week. She wrote, in the same precise sloping script, one line under the 10:07 entry. Shin, W chest, ask nothing. She closed the book. She stood. She lifted the tape measure from her shoulders for the first time that day, and she folded it in her palm, and she placed it on the desk beside the leather-bound book. And she walked out of her office, and she walked past Margox's closed door, and she rode the elevator down to the lobby, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk into the first snow of December. The snow fell slow and even along the block. The town cars were lined up outside the atelier the way they were lined up every Friday at 10. A driver held a door open. She did not take the car. She walked. Her heels made small, clean prints in the fresh snow, one after another, a line of measurements written in white by a woman who was still. In the eye of any stranger looking out a warm window, the master tailor of Duval Atelier, deep burgundy midi under her long black wool coat, silk press hair falling past her waist, tape measure, folded in her coat pocket, where a pistol would have gone if she had been the other kind of woman on the other kind of block. She was not the other kind of woman. She was not, yet, on the other kind of block, but somewhere behind her, in Suite 7, on the empty platform in front of the trifold mirror. A single white chalk mark on a half-basted shoulder seemed waited for a hand that would come back on Monday at 10:07, and would come back on Wednesday at 10:07, and would come back on Friday at 10:07, and would keep coming back until there were no flowers left on the East Coast, or until the Waldorf ballroom had been rebooked into silk, or until a woman in ice blue satin decided she had waited long enough and walked through a door she had not yet walked through, into a showroom she had not yet stormed. Vivian pulled her coat closer at the throat. She kept walking. The snow filled her footprints behind her the way a book fills its own margin when the writer stops writing and the paper decides on its own what the empty space is going to hold. She did not look back at the atelier windows. She did not need to. She already knew what was written on Monday's page. Monday came the way Monday always came at Duval Atelier. Silent, precise, cold light spilling through the tall windows onto rolls of virgin wool. Vivian arrived at 7, tape measure already draped across her shoulders, hair pulled back tight, deep burgundy dress smoothed at the waist. She did not glance at the calendar. She did not need to. 5 weeks remained until the wedding, and every one of them was a wall closing in. Celeste was already at the cutting table, sleeves rolled up, canvas apron dusted with white chalk. She lifted her head when Vivian came in, and the look she gave was careful, the way one looks at a bruise that has not yet turned color. "He's here early," Celeste said quietly. "Suite 7, alone." Alone? No bodyguard at the door, just him. Vivian did not answer. She poured black coffee into a small porcelain cup, drank half of it standing, and walked to the suite. Her heels made the sound they always made, measured, even, unhurried. Inside her chest, nothing was measured. Nothing was even. She pushed the door open. Shin Woo-jin stood at the trifold mirror with his back to her, half-basted tuxedo jacket over the crisp white shirt, top button undone, the coiled dragon rising a fraction along the left side of his neck. He did not turn. "Close the door, Vivian." She closed it. "Lock it." She hesitated, then she turned the small brass key. The click was louder than it should have been. 6 weeks, he said, still not turning. "That is how long I have been coming here, and in 6 weeks you have not once asked me a single question that mattered. I don't ask clients questions that matter. I am not a client." The words fell into the room and stayed there. Vivian did not move. He turned slowly. His face was the same disciplined mask, but something under it had shifted. He unbuttoned the top of his shirt one further notch deliberately, and the dragon showed a fraction more. It was not vanity, it was a signal. "The orchid," he said. "You received it. I burned the note." "Good. Was it you?" He did not answer directly. He walked toward her, slow, hands in his pockets, and stopped at exactly the distance a tailor stands from a client. Not closer. "There are 3 days a year I do not run this family," he said. "The anniversary of my brother's death, the Lunar New Year, and the day I signed a certificate I never dissolved. On that third day, every year, I send one orchid to the last address I had for a woman named Vivian Lancaster. For 6 years, the flowers came back. This year they did not." Her breath caught somewhere below her ribs and refused to move. "Do not say anything," he said. "Not yet. Anastasia will be here in 11 minutes. "How do you know?" "Because I told her to be here in 11 minutes. He walked past her, unlocked the door, and stepped back to the mirror. By the time Anastasia Volkov swept into the atelier, Woo-jin was already on the pedestal, arms slightly raised, and Vivian was already kneeling at his hem with pins between her lips. Anastasia did not knock. She never knocked. She came in with her white sable stole slung over one shoulder and Kang Do-yoon 2 steps behind her, radiating polite murder. Her ice-blue eyes found Vivian on the floor first, then Woo-jin above, and the corner of her painted mouth lifted. "Darling," she said to Woo-jin, "why is she always on her knees?" "Because that is where the hem is," Woo-jin said without looking at her. "Charming." She circled the pedestal, opera gloves creaking softly. "Miss Lancaster, may I have a word?" Vivian rose, pins still between her lips. She removed them, slid them into the wrist cushion, and stepped back a measured distance. "Of course, Madame Volkov. Not here." Anastasia's smile widened. "In the showroom, where there is light." The showroom was the front of the house, where clients waited, where Margox received foreign royalty, where junior seamstresses passed through carrying bolts of silk. It was, above all, public. Vivian understood and went anyway. Margox was there, ledger open, tortoise-shell glasses low on her nose. 2 junior girls were folding organza. Celeste, unfortunately, had just stepped in from the storeroom with an armful of raw silk. 6 pairs of eyes, 6 witnesses. Anastasia had counted them before she chose the room. She turned to Vivian slowly and let her voice climb just enough to carry. "Miss Lancaster, I have been patient. I have been kind. I have allowed my future husband to be dressed by a woman who, 6 weeks ago, I had never heard of. Do you know why I allowed it?" "Madam." Because Margox vouched for you, because Wu Jin, who is a busy man, does not enjoy being handled by strangers. She stepped closer. But now I look at you, and I wonder if my patience has been mistaken for permission. Margox began to rise. Anastasia lifted one gloved finger, and Margox, who had never been silenced by anyone in her own atelier in 30 years, sat down again in a way that made Vivian's stomach fold. "Look at me, Miss Lancaster." Vivian looked at her. "You should be flattered," Anastasia said, "that we let you touch him." The words dropped like a coin into a well. Somewhere in the back, one of the junior girls stopped folding. "You should be flattered," Anastasia went on, softer now, worse, "that a woman like me tolerates a woman like you within pinning distance of my husband. I have worn couture cut by men whose names you will never say without stumbling. I have stood in fitting rooms in Paris where the tailor did not raise his eyes to me once. And here you are in New York with your little tape measure and your little scarpins, and you have somehow decided that 6 weeks in this suite means you know him." "I do not know him, madam." "No, you do not." Anastasia leaned in. Her perfume was heavy, cold, expensive. "And you will not. Do you understand me, Miss Lancaster? Nod for me." Vivian did not nod. She lowered her hands to her sides. She kept her spine straight. She kept her chin exactly where a tailor's chin belongs, level, not raised, not lowered. "Madame Volkov," she said, and her voice came out even, "the hem on your husband's jacket is not finished. If you would like to continue this conversation, you are welcome to schedule it for after the fitting." The silence that followed was small and terrible. Margox's mouth twitched, the ghost of something proud. Anastasia's eyes narrowed to 2 thin blue slits. "Careful, Miss Lancaster." "Always, madam." Anastasia turned on her heel, tightened the sable stole, and walked back toward Suite 7. Kang Du-yoon lingered a half-second longer than necessary. His small dark eyes flicked over Vivian without expression, and then he followed. Margox waited until the suite door closed. Then she stood, walked over to Vivian, and put one thin hand on her wrist. The red silk ribbon at Margox's right wrist brushed Vivian's skin. "Ma petite," she said very quietly. "Breathe." Vivian breathed. "She will retaliate," Margox said. "You know that. I know that. You may leave for the rest of the day if you need to." "I need to finish the hem, Margox." Margox looked at her a long moment, then nodded once, gently, and let her go. The rest of the fitting was silent. Anastasia sat on the ivory chaise and watched, opera gloves folded on her lap. Wu Jin stood on the pedestal and did not look at Vivian and did not look at Anastasia. He looked at the mirror, and the mirror looked back. And in it, Vivian saw a man who had already decided something 6 years ago and was only now beginning to say it aloud in a language she could hear. When Vivian pinned the last chalk mark on the inseam, she felt his hand, for a fraction of a second, barely a touch, brush the top of her hair. Then it was gone. She rose. She kept her face still. She said, "Fitting complete. Please step down carefully." He stepped down carefully. Anastasia rose, smoothed her sable, said, "Come, darling," and swept out. Kang Du-yoon was the last to leave. At the door he paused, turned, and looked at Vivian across the empty suite. Then, so briefly she almost missed it, he inclined his head. A quarter of a bow. A tailor received a quarter bow from a man who did not bow. He closed the door behind him. Vivian sat down on the pedestal. Just for a moment. Just until her hands stopped shaking. She did not cry. She had not cried in 6 years. She was not going to start on a Monday morning in November with 2 suitcases still waiting in a closet at home. She stood up, gathered her pins, and went back to work. The atelier ran the rest of the day the way it always ran. Silk was cut. Buttons were sewn. 2 junior girls whispered in the storeroom and stopped whispering when Vivian walked past. Celeste hovered close, not saying anything, only being there, passing thread, refilling coffee, laying out chalk. Margox went into her office and closed the door and did whatever Margox did behind a closed door when a Volkov had just tried to break something. At 6 p.m., the atelier emptied. At 7 p.m., Celeste finally left, kissed Vivian on the cheek without a word, and disappeared into the cold. At 7:45, Vivian was alone with the wool crepe and a single lamp burning over the cutting table when the front bell rang. She froze. Duval Atelier did not receive walk-ins after hours. The front door was locked. The bell was the private courier bell, and the private courier bell was rung by exactly 4 people, none of whom rang it at night. She walked to the front. She unbolted the small viewing panel. She looked out. A boy stood there. 13, maybe, cap pulled low. In his gloved hands he held a slim black box, the kind florists reserve for a single stem. "For Miss Lancaster," he said. "Paid in cash, no sender." She opened the door 2 inches. She took the box. He was gone before she closed it. She carried the box to the cutting table. She set it down under the lamp. She stood over it a long moment before she lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of black tissue, lay a single black orchid, not deep purple, not dark maroon. True black, the rare hybrid, cultivated in exactly 1 greenhouse in the Hudson Valley and sold when it was sold to exactly 1 buyer at a time. Under the orchid, a card, heavy stock, unlined, written in ink so black it looked wet. "6 years ago you signed nothing. Neither did I. There was no signature. There did not need to be." Vivian sat down on the wooden stool by the cutting table. Slowly, carefully, as if the room might tilt if she moved too fast. She had signed nothing 6 years ago because she had run before the ink dried. She had believed that meant the paper was empty. She had believed that meant she was free. She had been wrong. The certificate had never been countersigned by her, but it had never been dissolved by him. Somewhere in a locked drawer in Manhattan, Koreatown, a document existed that named Vivian Lancaster the wife of Shin Woo-jin, and it had been sitting there for 6 years, waiting. Neither had she. She closed the box. She placed it in the bottom drawer of her workstation under the folded muslin. She locked the drawer. She sat with the key in her palm until her palm went cold. Then she stood up, put on her wool overcoat, wound the black cashmere scarf tight around her throat, turned off the lamp, and stepped out into the November street. The doorman at her building nodded her in. The elevator rose. She unlocked her apartment. She did not turn on the lights. She walked in the dark to the closet, opened it, and looked at the 2 suitcases sitting side by side on the floor. They had been packed and waiting for 6 weeks. She did not unpack them. She did not add to them. She only stood in the doorway and looked at them for a long time. Then she closed the closet, walked to the window, and looked down at the street. Across the avenue, parked half a block down, sat a black sedan, tinted windows, engine off. It had not been there an hour ago. She watched it for 10 minutes. It did not move. She let the curtain fall. That night she did not sleep. She lay on her back on top of the coverlet, still in her burgundy dress, hair still pulled back, hands folded over her stomach the way she used to lay in a hospital bed, and she thought. She thought about a rooftop garden in the Hudson Valley 6 years ago. Cold wind through the espalier apple trees. A judge with a whiskey glass in one hand and a pen in the other. 2 witnesses who worked for him, a man in a black tuxedo, no bespoke off the rack, and she remembered thinking even then that the shoulders were wrong, standing very still. She had worn a plain white dress her mother had sewn. She had been 25. She had not asked what family he came from. She had asked only if he had ever hurt a woman. He had said no. She had believed him. She still, 6 years later, believed him. They had said yes, both of them. Yes, in the wind, in the trees. The pen had been passed. He had signed. She had lifted it. She had held it above the line for a long time. Then she had put it down, said his name once, and walked to the elevator. She had never asked what happened to the certificate. She had assumed he would tear it up. She had assumed wrong. The black orchid sat in a locked drawer in Duval Atelier, and outside on her street sat a black sedan that had not moved in 3 hours, and somewhere in Koreatown a document existed that made her, in the eyes of one man and one family and one very old system of laws that predated the state of New York, the wife of Shin Woo-jin. At 3 in the morning she got up, made tea, and did not drink it. At 4 she watched the sedan finally pull away. Slowly, deliberately, as if the driver had been told to let her see him leave. At 5 she took a hot shower, put on a forest green silk blouse, black wool trousers, the same scarp and heels, and pulled her hair into a low chignon so tight it made her scalp ache. She wanted the ache. It kept her awake. At 6:40, she walked into Duval Atelier and unlocked the door. At 6:42, she opened the bottom drawer of her workstation. The black orchid was still there. She had, for one irrational moment on the elevator, been afraid it would have disappeared, that she would have imagined the whole night, that the certificate did not exist, and the sedan had not been real, and Anastasia had not said the words in the showroom in front of 6 people. But the orchid was still there, real, black, waiting. She closed the drawer. Celeste arrived at 7, saw Vivian's face, and did not ask. She poured coffee. She laid out the day's cutting list. She spread the Volkov dress muslin across the second table because today, of all days, Anastasia had a scheduled fitting. At 9:55, Anastasia arrived. She was not alone. Behind her, in a heavy charcoal 3-piece suit, black cashmere overcoat draped over one arm, gold Volkov crest cufflinks catching the light, walked a man Vivian had never seen in person and had, until that moment, only ever seen in a photograph in a client dossier. Dmitry Volkov. He removed his black fedora at the door, indoors, deliberately, and handed it to Kang Do-yoon, who was, Vivian noticed with a small cold shock, standing already in the atelier as if he had never left. Do-yoon accepted the hat without expression. That, more than anything else, told Vivian what the day was going to be. Dimitri's steel-gray eyes swept the room once. They rested on Margox, who was already rising from her desk, then on Celeste, who lowered her head, then finally on Vivian. The pale scar through his left eyebrow lifted slightly. "Miss Lancaster, Mr. Volkov, my daughter tells me you handle my future son-in-law's fittings personally. That is correct. That will change today." The words were spoken evenly, almost politely, the way a man might comment on the weather. Margox stepped forward. "Mr. Volkov, at Duval Atelier, the assignment of a master tailor to a client is decided by me, not by the client, not by the client's family." Dmitry turned his head slowly toward Margox. He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. "Madame Duval, I have admired your atelier for many years. It would be a tragedy if a small misunderstanding between our families ended a legacy older than my daughter." Margox did not move, but something in her jaw went very still. "Are you threatening my house, Mr. Volkov? I am inviting you," Dmitry said gently, "to make an adjustment." Vivian stepped forward before Margox could answer. "There will be no adjustment necessary." The room turned. She kept her voice level. She kept her hands folded loosely in front of her waist. She looked past Dmitry, past Anastasia, to the door of Suite 7, where Woo Jin had appeared silently, one shoulder against the frame, watching without a word. "I will not be measuring Mr. Shin any further," Vivian said. "Celeste Morau, my protégée, will complete the final 2 fittings. She has been trained by me personally. Her work is impeccable. Madame Duval will supervise. The wedding suit will be delivered on schedule and to standard." Anastasia's painted lips parted, then closed. She had come to enjoy a public execution. She had not expected the target to fall on her own sword first, and cleanly. Dmitry studied Vivian a long moment. His steel-gray eyes were unreadable. "A wise decision, Miss Lancaster. It is not wisdom, Mr. Volkov, it is arithmetic. There are only 6 days left. The atelier must not be delayed by a personal matter that does not exist. That does not exist. That does not exist." She did not look at Woo Jin. She could feel him at the edge of her vision, absolutely still, not breathing. Dmitry gave one small nod. He turned to Anastasia. "Come, we are finished here for today. But the dress, tomorrow." Anastasia opened her mouth, closed it, and obeyed. She did not look at Vivian on the way out. She looked at Margox instead, and her ice-blue eyes said everything her mouth had not said. Kang Do-yoon retrieved the fedora. He handed it to Dmitry. Dmitry put it on indoors, which was a message, and walked out. Woo Jin did not move from the doorframe. The door closed behind the Volkovs. For a long second no one spoke. Then Woo Jin said, very quietly, "Vivian." "Do not," she said. She did not turn to him. She kept her eyes on the front door. "Do not say my name in this room today." "Vivian." "I said do not." He came off the doorframe. He walked slowly until he stood 2 arm lengths from her. Kang Do-yoon had not left with the Volkovs. He had stepped into the storeroom, out of sight, out of hearing, but not out of range. "Your family," Vivian said, still not looking at Woo-jin, "will not be dressed by me. Your bride will not be dressed by me. Your wedding will not be dressed by me. I am a tailor, Mr. Shin. I cut cloth, nothing else." "Vivian, I received an orchid last night." "Silence, I know, you sent it." "I sent it every year for 6 years." "Vivian," she closed her eyes, just for a second. Then she opened them. "Please leave, Mr. Shin. Please take your bodyguard, and please leave, and please do not come back to this atelier until Celeste calls you for Thursday's fitting." "Vivian, listen to me. Dmitry Volkov did not come here today to intimidate Margox. He came here to see you. He came to look you in the face. He now knows exactly what you look like. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand." "You do not." "I do." Now she turned. Now she looked at him. Her dark brown eyes were dry and very, very steady. "I have understood since the moment I opened that client file, Mr. Shin. I understood the day I read your name. I understood in the mirror in Suite 7 when you refused to turn around. And I understood last night when I looked out my window and saw the sedan you sent to sit outside my building for 4 hours. I understand what family you belong to. I understand what family she belongs to. I understand what happens to the woman standing between them. That is why I am stepping back. Cleanly, publicly. Today, before Dmitry, Volkov has to make a decision he would enjoy making." He was silent. "Go home, Mr. Shin. Vivian, please." He stood there another moment. Then slowly he bowed. Not the quarter bow Kang Do-yoon had given her. A full one, waist, deep. The kind of bow a Korean man of his generation and his family gave exactly once in his life, to exactly one person, and never twice. Margox made a small sound behind her. Halfway between a breath and a word, Woo-jin straightened. He turned. He walked to the door. Kang Do-yoon fell in behind him from the storeroom without a sound. They left. The door closed. The atelier was silent. Celeste was the first to move. She came to Vivian, wordless, and took her by the elbow and led her to the wooden stool by the cutting table and sat her down on it. Margox went to her office, closed the door, and for the first time in Vivian's memory, locked it. Vivian sat on the stool with her hands folded in her lap. Her spine was straight. Her chin was level. Her face was still. Somewhere far away, a clock on the wall ticked. 5 days remained. Not 6 anymore. 5. Outside the atelier window, the first snow of the season began. So lightly it might not have been snow at all. Only the memory of it. It fell without sound onto Madison Avenue, onto the black wrought iron rails, onto the roof of the black sedan that had, at some point in the last 2 minutes, taken up its old position half a block down, engine off, tinted windows unreadable. Vivian did not look at the window. She looked at her hands. Her hands were shaking, very slightly, almost invisibly, but shaking. She placed one over the other, pressed down until they stopped, and did not move again for a long time. Celeste knelt beside the stool. She did not speak. She reached into the pocket of her canvas apron and pulled out a small square of raw silk, the color of undyed cream, and pressed it into Vivian's palm. It was a scrap, a remnant. The kind of piece a tailor kept for testing thread tension. Celeste closed Vivian's fingers around it gently, the way one closes a child's hand around a coin. "You taught me," Celeste said, so quietly it was almost only breath, "that a hem holds because of what you cannot see, not the top stitch, the blind stitch underneath, the one the client never notices." Vivian's throat moved once. "I am the blind stitch today, Vivian, not you. Let me carry the hem for 5 days." Vivian closed her eyes. A single tear crossed the bridge of her nose and disappeared into the wool of her trousers before it could fall. She did not lift a hand to wipe it. She would not give the snow, or the sedan, or the ghost of a certificate in a locked drawer in Koreatown the courtesy of that motion. Then she opened her eyes and squeezed Celeste's small warm hand once and let go. The snow kept falling on Madison Avenue. The sedan did not move, and somewhere in the private study of a house in Koreatown, Shin Woo-jin stood at a locked drawer with his hand on the brass pull and did not open it and did not walk away and did not, for a very long time, do anything at all. The story broke at 6:47 the next morning, and it did not break the way scandals used to break. In a printed column, read over breakfast by people who then folded the paper and forgot. It broke on 7 platforms at once, in 15 languages, with a photograph so precisely staged that even Vivian, seeing it later on Celeste's phone in the atelier backroom, could not immediately tell which parts were real and which parts had been assembled from other rooms and other nights. The photograph showed a woman who looked like her, from behind, in a deep burgundy dress, leaning close to a man in a half-basted tuxedo jacket. His hand rested on her hip. Her hand rested on his chest. The angle was slightly downward, taken from a corner of a ceiling, in a room that resembled VIP Suite 7 but was not. Someone had rebuilt the suite in a studio somewhere in Queens, matched the wallpaper stripe for stripe, matched the tri-fold mirror, matched the cream carpet. Then they had hired a model with skin the color of Vivian's and hair the length of Vivian's, and they had dressed a second model in a jacket cut to Woo Jin's measurements. And they had photographed them from an angle that could not exist unless a camera had been hidden in the crown molding of a room that did not, in fact, contain a camera. Under the photograph, in bold serif type, was the caption, "Head tailor of Duval Atelier engaged in inappropriate relationship with client during bridal fitting." Below the caption were 3 additional images, all faked with the same clinical care, all designed to be reblogged before any thoughtful person could examine them. Vivian's face was in none of the photographs. The back of her head was in all of them. Her signature dress, her signature hair, her signature tape measure across the shoulders. Anyone who had ever seen her in the atelier would look at the images and think, without meaning to think it, that is her. Celeste found her at 7:12 in the pattern cutting room, standing at the long oak table with a bolt of ivory silk unrolled in front of her and a pair of shears in her right hand. She had been about to cut. She had not cut. Celeste came in fast, phone in her hand, and Vivian saw her face and set the shears down without asking anything. "Show me," she said. Celeste handed her the phone. Vivian scrolled. She did not scroll fast, and she did not scroll slow. She scrolled the way a person reads a contract that she already knows will bind her. Her deep brown skin held its golden luminosity, but underneath it went cold, and Celeste watched the coldness travel down her face into her jaw, into the set of her shoulders, into the way her long fingers held the edge of the phone like it might otherwise fall. "Who put it out?" Vivian said. 3 shell accounts, Celeste said. Registered in Cyprus. Aggregators picked it up at 6:50. It's on page 6 now. It's on the WWD live blog. Someone at the Times has already called the Atelier main line twice. "Margox," Vivian said. "She's downstairs. She's on the phone with the lawyers. She said don't come down until she comes up to get you." Vivian handed the phone back. She rolled the ivory silk closed with careful hands, tied the linen ribbon around it, set it on the shelf above the table where it belonged. She wiped the table with the flat of her palm, although the table was already clean. She turned to Celeste. "The wedding is in 6 days," she said. "Yes." Anastasia knew this would post this morning. "Yes." Vivian nodded once. She walked to the coat rack and lifted her tape measure from where it hung and draped it across her shoulders like a stole and settled it. Then she walked out of the pattern-cutting room and down the narrow back stairs and through the corridor to the front of the atelier. And she did not run, and she did not hurry. But she also did not slow, and Celeste followed 3 steps behind and did not say anything. Margox was in the main showroom with her reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair and her phone at her ear. When she saw Vivian, she held up one finger. Vivian waited. Margox said something in French that was too fast for Vivian to catch, ended the call, put the phone face down on the console table, and looked at her. "They want a statement by noon," Margox said. "The board wants you suspended pending internal review." Vivian did not move. "I told them." Margox said that if they suspend you, they suspend me. And if they suspend me, the atelier does not open on Monday. And if the atelier does not open on Monday, the wedding of the year does not have a dress. And if it does not have a dress, the entire Volkov and Shin families will personally arrive in this showroom to ask why. So the board is thinking. Vivian said, "You should not have said that." "I said what was true," Margot said. "Sit down." "I do not need to sit." "Sit down anyway," Margot said, and Vivian, after a moment, sat on the edge of the cream velvet client chair with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap and her tape measure still across her shoulders. Margot sat opposite her. The silver bob was slightly disordered where the glasses had gone through it. The red silk ribbon on her right wrist was tied a little tighter than usual. "Listen to me carefully," Margot said. "I have been in this business 41 years. I have seen women destroyed by less than this. I have seen women destroyed by a whisper at a lunch. What has been done to you this morning is not a whisper. It is a bomb, and the person who said it did not set it to destroy you. She said it to force him to remove you. Do you understand the difference?" Vivian said, "Yes." "Then you understand what he will be told to do," Margot said, "and you understand what he will not be able to refuse to do, publicly, in front of the world that saw those photographs. Because if he defends you now, if he says a single word in your defense, he confirms them. So he will not defend you, not in any way that anyone will see. Do you understand?" "I understand," Vivian said. Her voice was steady. Celeste, standing in the archway, saw her hands in her lap, saw the knuckles under the deep brown skin, saw them go pale. "Good," Margot said, and softened, and reached across and put one thin hand over Vivian's folded hands. "Now, what do you want to do?" Vivian looked at her. The large, expressive, dark brown eyes held Margot's gray-green ones and did not blink. "I want to finish the dress," Vivian said. Margot did not react. She waited. "I want to finish Anastasia Volkov's wedding dress," Vivian said, exactly as she ordered it, exactly on the schedule she set. "I want it delivered to the plaza on the morning of the ceremony. I want every stitch to be perfect. I want her to put it on, and I want her to stand in front of a mirror, and I want her to know, when she looks at herself, that the woman she tried to destroy sewed every seam." Margot's mouth moved, almost imperceptibly, at one corner. "Then," Vivian said, "I want to walk out." Margot nodded slowly. Then she said, "You know what will happen if you finish the dress and walk out. You know what she will say." "She will say I was fired," Vivian said. "She will say I was too ashamed to be seen. She will say I ran." "Yes, I don't care what she says." "Yes, you do," Margot said very quietly. "But you have decided it does not matter, which is not the same thing." Vivian looked down at Margot's hand over her hands. She did not answer. "All right," Margot said, "all right. Then we finish the dress. Celeste, go upstairs, get the final bodice. We do the last fitting today at 3. Anastasia will come. She will smile. You will smile back. Vivian, you will not touch her. Do you hear me? You will supervise. Celeste will pin. If Anastasia asks why, you will say the head tailor does not perform the final adjustment on any gown. It is atelier protocol. She will know it is not protocol. She will not press it in front of witnesses. Do you understand?" "Yes," Vivian said. "Then go. Both of you, go upstairs. Work. Do not look at your phones. Do not read anything. I will handle the front of the house. If a journalist calls, I will handle the journalist. If the board calls, I will handle the board. If anyone else calls, no matter who it is, no matter what name they use, you do not answer. You do not answer, Vivian, do you hear me?" Vivian understood who Margot meant. She did not say his name. She said, "I hear you." "Good. Go." Vivian stood. She smoothed the front of her deep burgundy dress with the flat of her palms. She adjusted the tape measure across her shoulders. She walked past Celeste toward the back stairs, and Celeste followed, and neither of them looked at the front window of the atelier, where, on the sidewalk across Madison Avenue, 3 men with cameras were standing very still and waiting for something they could photograph. Upstairs, in the pattern cutting room, Vivian worked. She worked the way she had worked at 14 in the back of the church basement in Harlem, where a Guyanese woman named Mrs. Beaumont had taught her to set a sleeve without pulling the shoulder line. She worked the way she had worked at 19 through her first year at Parsons, on a scholarship that covered tuition and nothing else, sewing sample gowns at night for a wholesaler in the garment district for $4 apiece. She worked the way she had worked at 25, when Margot had taken her on as third assistant, and she had slept on a cot in the storage room for the first 11 months. She worked without looking at the clock. She worked without eating. She pinned the bodice on the padded dress form and adjusted the hand-cut French chantilly lace along the neckline with the tip of a bone-handled awl. Her hands did not shake. Celeste, who had been through many fittings and many crises and one small fire, watched her from across the room and understood that she was watching a woman survive. She did not interrupt. She threaded needles when Vivian needed them threaded. She held silks when Vivian needed them held. She poured water into a glass and set the glass at Vivian's elbow and did not say drink. At 2:40 in the afternoon, Anastasia Volkov arrived at the atelier with 3 assistants, 1 publicist, and 1 bodyguard she had not brought before. She was in an ice blue satin day dress and the white sable stole across her shoulders, and platinum blonde old Hollywood waves brushed to a mirror shine. Her ice blue eyes were bright. Her lips were perfectly drawn. She was radiant with a specific radiance that Vivian recognized immediately as the radiance of a woman who has watched something she planned unfold exactly as she planned it. Margox met her at the door and led her into VIP Suite 7, where Celeste stood at the padded form with the finished bodice on it, and Vivian stood 2 steps behind Celeste with her hands folded in front of her and the tape measure across her shoulders. Anastasia's eyes went first to the bodice, which was flawless, and then to Vivian and stayed there. Vivian, Anastasia said. Her voice was warm. Miss Volkov, Vivian said. I saw the news this morning, Anastasia said. I am so sorry. It must be very difficult for you. Vivian said nothing. Of course, Anastasia said. I know none of it is true. I know Wu Jin would never. She smiled, but people talk. People are so cruel. I hope Madame Duval is taking good care of you. She is, Vivian said. Good. Anastasia's ice blue eyes moved once deliberately up and down Vivian's deep burgundy dress. Good. Now, let us see the bodice. Celeste stepped forward. Anastasia allowed herself to be helped out of the ice blue satin and into the ivory bodice pinned over a slip. Celeste knelt at the hem and began the adjustment. Vivian stood 2 steps back with her hands folded and did not move and did not speak. Anastasia watched her in the mirror the entire time. At one point, Anastasia said, without turning, Vivian, the seam under the left arm feels tight. Would you check it? Celeste's hands paused on the hem. Miss Volkov, Vivian said, atelier protocol on the final fitting is that the head tailor supervises but does not adjust. Celeste will check the seam. Anastasia's smile did not move, but her eyes, in the mirror, narrowed by 0.5 millimeter. Of course, she said, how professional. Celeste checked the seam. The seam was perfect. Celeste said so. Anastasia said she was sure it was. She must have imagined it, and turned her head and smiled again, and the fitting continued. And 42 minutes later, Anastasia was back in her ice blue satin and her white sable stole, and she was standing at the door of VIP Suite 7 with Vivian 2 steps behind her and Margox beside her. She turned in the doorway. She looked at Vivian one last time. Vivian, she said, I truly hope you find peace, whatever comes next. Thank you, Miss Volkov, Vivian said. Anastasia held her eyes for one more beat. Then she was gone, publicist and assistants and bodyguard flowing after her like a wake, and the door of the suite clicked shut and Margox exhaled once hard through her teeth. That woman, Margox said. Vivian did not answer. She was looking at the bodice on the padded form. It was perfect. She reached out and adjusted one pin that did not need adjusting. At 8:40 that evening, in a private study 3 miles north in Koreatown, Shin Woo-jin stood at his desk with his phone in his hand, and Kang Do-yoon standing at attention 6 feet away. On the desk, printed on heavy paper, laid out in a fan, were the 3 photographs and the caption. Woo-jin had been looking at them for a very long time. Do-yoon said, "Boss." Woo-jin did not answer. "Boss," Do-yoon said again. Dmitry Volkov requested a meeting for 9. It is 8:40. I know what time it is, Woo-jin said. His voice was very quiet. The dragon tattoo on the left side of his neck was fully covered by the collar of the crisp Egyptian cotton white premium dress shirt. His dark almond eyes were on the photographs, and they were the coldest they had ever been in his life. He will ask you, Du-yoon said, to remove her. Yes, he will insist. Yes. If you refuse in front of him, Du-yoon said, it becomes a war before the wedding. The wedding cannot happen if the war starts before the wedding. If the wedding does not happen, the trap does not close. If the trap does not close, 40 Volkov captains do not walk into the ballroom, and the 6 years of planning end here, tonight, in this room, over a woman. Woo Jin lifted his eyes from the photographs and looked at Du-yoon. Du-yoon did not flinch. He had known Woo Jin 22 years. He had said harder things. I know what you are asking, Woo Jin said. I am not asking, Du-yoon said. I am reporting the operational reality. Woo Jin set the phone down on the desk beside the photographs. He put one hand flat on the desk. The platinum Swiss ultra-thin watch on his left wrist caught the low lamplight. He looked past Du-yoon at the far wall, where a single ink scroll hung in a black frame, and he looked at the ink scroll for a long time. Then he said, "Bring the car." "Yes, boss," Du-yoon. "Yes, boss, I will tell him what he wants to hear." Du-yoon said nothing. He waited. "I will tell him," Woo Jin said, "that the Tailor problem is handled. I will tell him she will be gone by tomorrow morning. I will tell him he has my word." "Yes, boss, and you," Woo Jin said, "will not touch her. You will not send anyone to touch her. You will not send anyone to speak to her. You will not send anyone within 1 block of her. Do you understand?" "I understand, boss." "If she leaves the atelier on her own," Woo Jin said, "we let her leave. If she leaves the city on her own, we let her leave. If she goes anywhere at all on her own, we let her go. And no one from any family, mine or Volkov, comes within sight of her. Ever. Am I clear?" "You are clear, boss." Woo Jin looked at the photographs on the desk one more time. His face did not change. Then he swept them with the side of his hand into the wastebasket beside the desk in one clean motion, and he lifted his half-basted tuxedo jacket from where it hung over the back of the chair, and he settled it across his shoulders, and he walked out of the study to meet Dmitry Volkov and lie to him with the kind of stillness that in the Shin family was considered a form of prayer. At the atelier, at 11:42 that night, Vivian finished the last bead on the hem of the Anastasia Volkov wedding gown. She tied off the thread. She cut it with her small silver scissors. She stood back from the padded form. The gown, in the pool of the single overhead lamp, was the most beautiful thing she had ever made in her life. She looked at it for 1 minute. She did not cry. Then she walked to the small wardrobe in the corner of the pattern cutting room where she kept her overnight things for late nights, and she took out her navy wool coat and she folded it once over her arm. Celeste was still there. Celeste had refused to leave. Celeste was at the long oak table pretending to sort thread and had been pretending for 2 hours. "Celeste," Vivian said. Celeste looked up. "I need you to do 3 things," Vivian said. "Are you listening?" Celeste nodded. "Tomorrow morning at 7, Vivian said, you will come here and you will take the gown off the form and you will steam it and you will bag it and you will send it to the plaza by the atelier courier at 9. You will not let Anna Kowalski from finishing touch it. You will not let anyone touch it. You will steam it yourself." "Yes." "Second, when Margox asks where I am, you will tell her I went home. You will not tell her anything else. If she presses, you will say I asked you not to say. She will understand." "Yes." "Third," Vivian's voice softened slightly, "take care of yourself. Do not stay late at the atelier without me. Do not let anyone move you into VIP 7. Do not let anyone dress you in deep burgundy for a client. Do you hear me?" Celeste's eyes had gone wet. She nodded. "Say it," Vivian said. "I hear you," Celeste said. "Good." Vivian walked to her and put both hands on Celeste's shoulders and looked at her for a long moment. Then she kissed her once on the forehead, the way an older sister might, and turned and walked out of the pattern cutting room. She did not look back at the gown on the form. She walked down the narrow back stairs and through the corridor and past Margox's dark office and out the service door into the alley behind the atelier. The snow had started sometime after 10. Now, at 11:58, it was coming down in thick soft flakes, silent, straight, gathering on the cobblestones of the alley and on the fire escapes above and on the rims of the trash bins. Vivian pulled her navy wool coat around her shoulders and buttoned it and settled the tape measure underneath the collar so it would not show. Her breath made a small white cloud in front of her face and drifted up and vanished. She walked out of the alley to Madison Avenue. Madison at midnight in a snowfall was very nearly empty. One yellow cab passed. She did not hail it. She walked south, unhurried, her heels making small clean prints in the fresh snow, her long silk press hair falling below the waist of the coat and gathering white on the crown. 12 blocks south, her apartment building rose out of the snow. She let herself in. She rode the elevator to the 7th floor. She unlocked her door. Inside, the apartment was as she had left it that morning, which was very neat, which was almost bare. She turned on one lamp. She took the 2 suitcases from the hall closet, one large, one small, both black leather, both worn at the corners from the flights she had taken when Margot sent her to Paris and Milan for the fabric buys. She packed. She did not pack the way people pack in movies, throwing things. She folded. Every blouse, every trouser, every dress. She folded the forest green silk blouse and the midnight navy and the warm top and 3 structured vests. She folded 4 pairs of trousers. She folded the deep burgundy she was wearing later because she would wear it out of the apartment. She rolled her stockings. She placed her small jewelry box with the gold stud earrings and the Swiss dress watch inside the smaller case. She placed her tape measures, all 7 of them, cotton and vinyl and linen, and one very old one that had been Mrs. Beaumont's, on top of the folded clothes in the larger case. She placed her bone-handled awl and her small silver scissors and her thimble and her 12 favorite needles in a leather roll on top of the tape measures. She did not pack anything from Wu Jin. There was nothing from him to pack. He had never given her anything. He had never left anything at her apartment. He had never been to her apartment. There was, in a small carved box on her dresser, a scrap of white basting thread that she had absent-mindedly wound around her finger during a fitting 3 weeks ago, and had, without deciding to, brought home with her and set in the box. She looked at the box. She opened it. She looked at the thread. She closed the box and left it on the dresser and did not take it. At 2:17 in the morning, she closed both suitcases. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands on her knees and looked at the wall. She sat like that for 11 minutes. Then she stood up. She wrote no note. There was no one to write a note to. Margot would understand. Celeste would understand. Wu Jin would either understand or not understand, and it was no longer her concern which. She put on her navy wool coat. She lifted the larger case in her right hand and the smaller case in her left. She turned off the lamp. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. For one heartbeat, she thought of him. She thought of the way he had stood in front of the trifold mirror the first morning without turning, the dragon tattoo half visible above the collar of the white premium dress shirt. She thought of his voice saying only her. She thought of the black orchid on the marble console and the unsigned note. She thought of him standing somewhere at this hour, at 2:17 in a snowstorm, doing whatever he was doing to protect her by never being seen to protect her. She thought of him, and she did not cry. She opened the door and she walked out and she pulled the door shut behind her and she heard the lock click. And then she walked down the 7th floor corridor to the elevator, and rode it down, and crossed the small lobby, and pushed open the front door of the building, and stepped out onto the sidewalk into the snow. The snow was falling harder now. Madison Avenue was covered in a thin, unbroken layer of white, and no one had walked on it for hours. The street lamps made small, warm circles of light, and between the circles the world was blue and quiet. Vivian set the smaller case down for a moment and adjusted her collar and lifted the case again and started walking north, toward Grand Central, because Grand Central at 3 in the morning was the only warm building she could think of that would not ask her questions. She walked. The 2 suitcases were heavy. Her feet in the black pointed-toe scarpin heels were not made for 6 blocks in snow. She did not stop. Her breath made small clouds in front of her face and drifted up and vanished. Her long silk press hair grew heavier with white on the crown and on the shoulders. Somewhere behind her, a block or 2 back, a black SUV rolled slowly along the curb and matched her pace at a distance. And Kang Duyun sat in the passenger seat with his gloved hands folded in his lap and watched her walking and did not tell the driver to close the distance, and did not tell the driver to fall back. And after 8 blocks, the SUV made a right turn without her ever having seen it, and she walked the rest of the way to Grand Central alone. The wedding was in 6 days. 6 days, she thought, as she walked, and her heels made small clean prints in the fresh snow that were, behind her, already beginning to fill in with new snow and disappear. The wedding day arrived the way any day arrives when a woman has stopped counting. Vivian Lancaster woke in a small rented studio on the 3rd floor of a brownstone in Sunset Park. The winter sun cut a thin white line across the wooden floor. She lay in the narrow bed with her hands folded on top of the blanket and did not move. Her 2 suitcases were still packed and stacked against the wall. She had not unpacked. That would have meant staying, and she had not decided whether she was staying or only pausing here on her way somewhere else. She got up at 7. She washed her face at the small sink and looked in the mirror and saw a woman she almost recognized. Her long silk press hair had lost some polish from 6 days without a professional touch, but she had brushed it back into its dead straight center part, and it fell past her waist the way it always fell. She wore a plain gray turtleneck and black wide-leg trousers bought for cash. She had left the burgundy dress folded on a shelf. Her shoulders felt light without the tape measure, as if she had misplaced a piece of her own body. She made instant coffee on the electric kettle and stood by the window and watched the yellow taxis crawl along the avenue below. Across the East River, on the top floor of the Pierrepont Hotel, a ballroom was being prepared for the wedding of the year. She had read the venue in a discarded newspaper on the subway 3 days ago. She had not gone looking for the news. It had found her. She thought about not thinking about it. She sat down on the edge of the bed and set the coffee cup on the floor beside her foot. She looked at her hands. She thought about Woo Jin standing on the fitting box 6 days ago with the black wool half-basted to his shoulders and the pin cushion strapped to her wrist and the small clean sound of chalk on cloth. She thought about the way he had said, without ever raising his voice, that no one else would measure him. She had believed him then. She had believed him when he had asked her, in the doorway of Suite 7 with his hand almost brushing her sleeve, whether she trusted him. She had said no. She still meant no. And yet, sitting on the edge of her rented bed in a borough she had never lived in, she was surprised to find that she did not feel like a woman who had been discarded. She felt like a woman who had been placed somewhere for safekeeping. The distinction was thin. She was not sure she was allowed to make it. At 9, the small television in the corner clicked itself on a timer she did not remember setting. A morning show was running its ordinary noise. And then, without warning, a red banner appeared along the bottom of the screen, and the anchor lifted her head from her notes and said the words Pierrepont Hotel, and Vivian Lancaster set the coffee cup down on the floor very carefully so that she would not spill it. Across the East River, on the top floor of the Pierrepont, 400 guests were being seated. The ballroom had been dressed in ivory and pale gold. 2,000 white orchids had arrived the day before from a supplier Woo Jin had personally approved after the collapse of the original florist. Diplomats, bankers, 3 federal judges, 2 governors, and an entire delegation of Volkov captains flown in from St. Petersburg had passed through the metal detector at the door and surrendered nothing, because nothing had been asked of them. They believed themselves to be guests. They were, in a very specific sense, ingredients. Kang Do-yoon stood at the back of the ballroom in his charcoal double-breasted suit and his black turtleneck and his black leather gloves. His earpiece was in. His hands were folded in front of him. He was watching the doors. He was counting. He had already counted 40 men of his own who were not visibly present and who were, at this moment, in the service corridors and the kitchen and the loading dock and the stairwells, dressed as waiters and as valets and as members of the string ensemble. He was counting the Volkov captains. He had reached 31. He was waiting for 32. At the front of the room, on a raised dais lined with white silk, an interfaith officiant was checking his notes. The string ensemble had begun the prelude. Dmitry Volkov sat in the front row on the bride's side in his bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit with the heavy gold signet ring on his right pinky and the gold Volkov crest cufflinks catching the chandelier light. He looked at his watch. He looked at the door. He looked at his watch again. His pale scar cut through his left eyebrow, the way it always cut through his left eyebrow, and his steel-gray eyes moved once around the room and did not settle on anything. The doors at the back opened. Anastasia Volkov entered on the arm of a man who was not her father, because her father was already seated. She wore an ivory pearl silk gown with a 12-foot train and a diamond choker that had once belonged to a Romanov cousin. Her platinum blonde hair fell in polished old Hollywood waves to the middle of her back. She smiled the exact smile she had rehearsed. She began to walk. The 400 heads turned. Shin Woo-jin was already at the altar. He had been at the altar for 11 minutes. He wore the bespoke black tuxedo Vivian Lancaster had cut and pinned and stitched and refused to release. The half-basting was gone. The white chalk marks were gone. The loose thread was gone. What remained was a garment so exact that it looked, from across the ballroom, like a shadow that had been given permission to stand upright. His deep black hair was combed back in its classic side part. His face showed nothing. The dragon on the left side of his neck was invisible beneath the crisp white collar. His platinum Swiss ultra-thin watch caught the light on his left wrist. His hands were at his sides, loose, unclenched, unhurried. Anastasia reached the 5th row. The string ensemble held the note. Woo-jin took one step forward from the altar, and then he stopped. 3 steps from the platform. He did not turn to face his bride. He turned instead to face the room. He lifted his right hand, palm open, and the ensemble stopped playing on the exact half-beat, as if a conductor they could not see had struck the air. The silence that dropped into the ballroom was the kind of silence that has weight. 400 people felt it settle on their shoulders. Anastasia stopped walking. Her white satin heel hovered a 1/4 inch above the ivory runner. She did not put it down. Woo-jin reached inside the left breast of his tuxedo jacket. He drew out a folded document. The paper was cream, thickened with age, the corners softened. He unfolded it once. He unfolded it twice. He held it up so that the front row could see it, and so that the cameras positioned along the wall for the society coverage could see it. And he said, in the flat, calm voice that Manhattan Koreatown had learned in 6 years to be more frightened of than any raised voice, that this was a marriage certificate. That it had been signed on a Tuesday afternoon 6 years ago at a courthouse on Center Street. That the 2 signatures on it were his own, and the signature of a woman named Vivian Lancaster. That the certificate had never been dissolved. That there had never been a divorce filed. That there had never been an annulment. That, in the eyes of the state of New York, and in the eyes of the Republic of Korea, and in the eyes of every jurisdiction his family did business in, he was already a married man, and had been a married man for 6 years, and had never, at any point in those 6 years, been legally free to marry anyone else. The 400 heads did not turn. They did not move. The ballroom held its breath the way a lung holds a breath in a cold room. Anastasia set her white satin heel down. She put it down slowly. Her ice-blue eyes did not go to Woo-jin. They went to her father. Dmitry Volkov had gone the color of the ivory chairs. He had not yet stood up. His right hand had closed around the gold-crested arm of the pew until the knuckles were the color of paper. Woo-jin folded the certificate. He did not put it back inside his jacket. He held it in his left hand, at his side, the way a man holds a set of keys he has no intention of losing. He said, still without turning to face the aisle, that there was one further matter. He reached into the same inside pocket and drew out a second document. This one was shorter. This one was newer. This one had a red seal along the bottom that had been produced, 6 years ago, by a notary in Brighton Beach who had since retired to a fishing village outside Odessa and could no longer be reached by anyone. He said the words divorce decree. He said the name Anastasia Volkov. He said the date. He said that the seal was authentic. He said that the notary had been authentic. He said that the marriage that this decree had purported to dissolve had, in fact, existed. He said that the man who had signed it, on the groom's line, had been a low-ranking soldier of the Shin family who had been paid the equivalent of 40,000 American dollars to sit at a table in Brighton Beach. and write a name that was not his own, and to keep his mouth shut afterward. He said that the marriage that Anastasia Volkov believed she had exited 6 years ago had never been exited, because it had never, in the way she believed, been entered. He said that every subsequent engagement, every subsequent contract, every subsequent alliance she had brought to the table on the strength of her availability had been built on a document forged in a language her father did not read. He said the word forgery once. He did not raise his voice. Anastasia's mouth opened. It did not close. At the back of the ballroom, at the exact moment Woo Jin said the word forgery, Kang Do-yoon lifted his right hand and touched, very lightly, the small pin on the lapel of his charcoal double-breasted suit. Along the 4 service corridors, in the kitchen, at the loading dock, in the stairwells, and inside the string ensemble, 40 men in white waiter jackets and black valet vests and black concert tie set down their trays and their coats and their bows. They drew from beneath their jackets, in a single movement that was not quite audible and not quite silent, 40 small dark objects that were not, technically, weapons under the Pierrepont's insurance rider, and which became weapons the moment they left the holsters. The 4 service doors at the 4 corners of the ballroom clicked shut. The bolts fell home. The bolts had been installed 3 nights before by a contractor Woo Jin owned. 400 guests began, at the same moment, to understand that they were not guests. Woo Jin turned, finally, to face the aisle. He did not look at Anastasia. He looked past her, at Dmitry Volkov, in the front row. He said, in the same flat voice, that he thanked the Volkov family for its punctual attendance. He said that he had been made to understand, through channels his family had spent 5 years cultivating, that a certain gathering of Volkov captains from 3 continents had been extremely difficult to convene under any single roof. He said that a wedding had proven to be the one roof under which they would all agree to sit. He said that he was grateful for their cooperation. Dmitry Volkov stood up. He stood up slowly. He looked once at his daughter, and once at Woo Jin, and once at the closed doors at the back of the ballroom, and once at the balcony where, along the marble rail, 6 more men in dark suits had appeared without anyone having noticed them arrive. He sat back down. He did not sit down all the way. He sat on the edge of the pew. His right hand did not release the arm. Woo Jin lifted the marriage certificate again. He said one more sentence. He said that the wedding, as scheduled, was cancelled. He said that the reception, as scheduled, was cancelled. He said that the ballroom, as scheduled, was now closed. He said that the Volkov captains would be escorted, one by one, into the small side rooms along the west corridor for a brief and private conversation. He said that no one else in the ballroom would be harmed. He said that the string ensemble would resume playing in 90 seconds, and that the 400 remaining guests would be served champagne, and that at the end of the afternoon they would be allowed to leave, and that they would each be given, at the door, a small ivory envelope containing a written request that they never speak of what they had witnessed. He said that the request would be honored. He folded the certificate for a second time and put it back inside his jacket. He walked, past Anastasia, without looking at her, down the runner of ivory silk toward the back of the ballroom. Kang Do-yoon opened the small hidden door beside the last row of pews. Woo Jin walked through it. The door closed. The string ensemble began to play. In the small rented studio in Sunset Park, Vivian Lancaster stood in front of the little television with her hands hanging at her sides and her long silk press hair falling past her waist and her face very still. The red banner along the bottom of the screen had been replaced by a second red banner. The anchor was reading a name she did not know how to say out loud yet. The camera cut, for 1/2 of 1 second, to a still photograph of a man in a black tuxedo standing at an altar with a folded cream document in his hand. She sat down on the floor. She sat down slowly. She did not cry. She put her hands over her face and she did not cry. She stayed that way for a long time. Then she reached, without looking, for the coffee cup she had set on the floor an hour earlier, and she drank what was left of the cold coffee, and she stood up, and she went into the small bathroom, and she washed her face, and she came back out, and she began, very quietly, to unpack one of the two suitcases. She did not unpack the other. She thought, as she folded the burgundy dress into the small dresser drawer, that she did not know yet what she was going to do. She thought that she was not going to the Pierrepont. She thought that she was not going to Koreatown. She thought that she was not going to any address that could be found in any file. She thought that she was going to sit in this small room on the third floor of a brownstone in Sunset Park, and that she was going to drink another cup of coffee, and that she was going to wait, not for him, because she was not waiting for him, but for the moment when she would know what her next sentence was. The next sentence, when it came, did not come in the shape of a man. It came in the shape of an envelope. It arrived the following Tuesday, hand-delivered by a courier who did not identify the sender and who was gone before Vivian reached the door. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet of heavy cream paper. On the sheet were 3 lines. The first line was an address in Milan, in the Brera district, of a small ground-floor commercial space with tall windows facing north. The second line was the phrase, "The lease is paid for 5 years." The third line was the phrase, "Your name." She read the 3 lines 4 times. She did not recognize the handwriting. She recognized the paper. It was the same cream weight as the certificate he had unfolded in the ballroom. She folded the sheet. She put it inside the second, unopened suitcase. She closed the suitcase. She did not open it again for 8 days. On the 9th day, she bought a one-way ticket to Milan. She did not tell anyone. She did not call Margox. She did not call Celeste. She left the small studio in Sunset Park with her 2 suitcases, and she took the air train to JFK, and she flew, on a Tuesday afternoon in early April, over the Black Atlantic. And she watched the small map on the seatback screen the entire way, and she did not sleep, and she did not eat. And when the plane began its descent over the Lombard Plain and the Alps rose on the northern horizon in a white broken line, she opened her small notebook and she wrote, on the first clean page, 3 words in her own handwriting, and closed the notebook and put it away and did not look at what she had written until she had passed through customs and taken a taxi into the city and stood, at last, with her 2 suitcases on the pavement in front of the tall windows of the small ground-floor commercial space in the Brera district that had been waiting for her for 6 weeks. The 3 words, when she read them again that evening, sitting on the bare wooden floor of the empty atelier with the last light of the Milanese spring coming in low through the north-facing windows, were the 3 words she would eventually, 6 months later, have painted in small gold serif letters on the glass of the door. Lancaster, Atelier, Milano. She did not use Duval. She did not use any name she had used in Manhattan. She used the name she had been born with, the name her grandmother had signed on a ledger in a South Carolina cotton mill in 1954, the name her mother had signed on a lease in Harlem in 1988, the name she herself had signed, once, 6 years ago, on a marriage certificate in a courthouse on Center Street. She had not known, when she had signed it, that she was signing anything that would outlast her. The atelier opened, quietly, at the end of September. It had 6 clients in the first month. It had 11 clients in the second month. By the end of the 6th month, it had a waiting list of 42 women. And Vivian Lancaster was working 16-hour days again, and her tape measure was again draped across her shoulders like a stole. And her long silk press hair fell past her waist and got in the way of her pins and did not get cut. And she wore the deep burgundy dress on Mondays, and the forest green blouse on Wednesdays, and the midnight navy on Fridays. And she measured shoulders and pinned hems and marked chalk lines on fine Italian wool and Egyptian cotton and heavy silk crepe. And she did not, at any point in those 6 months, speak the name of the country she had come from. On a Thursday in early October, at 6:42 in the evening, as she was closing the atelier for the day, a small package arrived. The courier had a Milanese accent. The courier did not identify the sender. The courier was gone before Vivian reached the door. The package was small. It was wrapped in dark green paper. It was tied with a thin band of black silk. It weighed almost nothing in her hand. She carried it to the long cutting table at the back of the atelier. She set it down on the polished wood. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she untied the black silk band and unwrapped the dark green paper and lifted the lid of the small black box that lay beneath it. Inside the box, on a folded square of white silk, was a plain gold ring. It was the ring she had signed for, 6 years ago, at a courthouse on Center Street. It was the ring she had left, 6 years ago, on a table in a rented apartment on the Upper West Side, because she had not been able to make herself keep it and had not been able to make herself throw it away. She had assumed, for 6 years, that it had been sold or lost or melted down. She had assumed for 6 years that it no longer existed in the world. Beneath the ring, tucked into the folded silk, was a small card. The card was cream, heavier than paper, the same weight as the certificate he had unfolded in the ballroom. On the card, in a handwriting she recognized only because she had, 6 weeks ago in Sunset Park, seen it once before on the 3-line note, were 2 sentences. "You never had to sign anything," the first sentence said. "You were always my wife," the second sentence said. Beneath the 2 sentences, on a 3rd line in the same disciplined black ink, were 4 more words. "Now be free," the last line said. Vivian Lancaster stood at the long cutting table at the back of her atelier in the Brera district of Milan, and she read the 12 words on the small cream card 3 times. She did not cry. She did not sit down. She did not reach for a chair. She stood exactly where she was, in her deep burgundy Italian wool crepe midi dress with a thin black leather belt at the waist, and the tape measure draped across her shoulders like a stole, and her long silk press hair falling past her waist, and her small gold stud earrings catching the last of the October light, and she closed her right hand around the plain gold ring. She did not put the ring on. She did not put it back in the box, either. She closed her hand around it. She held it. Her fingers, which had spent the entire day pinning silk and marking chalk and holding pins between her lips and threading needles too fine to see without narrowing her eyes, closed around the small, warm circle of gold and did not open again for a long time. She did not send the ring back. She did not write to the address she did not have. She did not board a plane. She did not, in any of the movements of that October evening, do any of the things a woman is supposed to do when a man on another continent has sent her the ring he once put on her finger and has asked her, in 12 words, to accept the shape of a love that has agreed, on his side and on hers, to survive from a distance because the alternative would kill it. She simply closed her hand. She stood there, at the long cutting table in the empty atelier, with her hand closed around the ring for a long time. Outside the tall north-facing windows, the light went from gold to rose to gray. The bells of a small church 3 streets away rang the hour. She heard them, and she did not lift her head. When the bells had finished, and the atelier had gone almost fully dark, she opened her hand. She looked at the ring. It sat on her palm, a small round weight, warm from the heat of her own skin, exactly as it had sat 6 years ago on a table in a rented apartment on the Upper West Side. She closed her hand again, and this time, without looking, she walked to the small locked drawer beneath the cutting table, and she opened the drawer, and she set the ring inside it, on the folded square of white silk that had come in the box, and she closed the drawer, and she turned the small brass key, and she put the key on the thin gold chain around her neck where the little Swiss dress watch sometimes hung when she was not wearing it on her wrist, and she straightened her tape measure across her shoulders, and she turned off the last of the atelier lights, and she locked the front door behind her, and she walked out into the cool Milanese evening, past the small church, past the wine bar on the corner, past the 2 students smoking under the street lamp, and she went home to her small apartment 3 streets away, and she made herself dinner, and she ate it standing at the window, and she went to bed at 11, and she slept, for the first time in 6 months, without waking once before dawn. The ring stayed in the drawer. She did not wear it. She did not send it back. She did not speak of it to anyone, and no one ever asked. Every so often, on a Sunday afternoon when the light through the north-facing windows was the particular gold that only Milan in October produced, she would unlock the drawer, take out the small warm circle, hold it for a while, put it back, and go on with her work. That was the shape their love took. That was the shape it kept. Somewhere across an ocean, in a top-floor apartment above a private bank in Manhattan, Koreatown, a man in a deep gray turtleneck stood at a window and looked at the lights of the city he had cleaned, one Volkov captain at a time, in a single afternoon the previous spring. He did not wear a ring either. On the small rosewood table beside his reading chair sat a folded square of cream paper with 3 words on it in a handwriting he recognized. The 3 words were the address of a small ground-floor space in the Brera district of Milan. He had memorized it. He had never gone. He never would. That was the whole shape. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever measured someone with your own hands and felt that your body remembered a truth your mind had signed away? Have you ever walked out into the snow with 2 suitcases believing silence was the last dignity you had left? Would you have opened that small package from Milan or closed your hand around the ring and let the door stay shut? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about loyalty, hidden vows, and freedom, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.